Hi everybody, Grandad here again, and today I'm going to tell you a little story about something that I hope you'll find an interesting little account. It certainly was quite a remarkable find in Shropshire, and it all began, and it concerns, I'll just start off and tell you a little bit about it. It concerns this little chap. Now you all probably recognise him as being a woolly mammoth. Now woolly mammoths were said to be extinct about 15,000 years ago. There may have been a few left over in Siberia and in the darkest places over in Siberia, but generally speaking in Europe they thought that the woolly mammoth was extinct about 15,000 years ago, after the series of ice ages. England at that time was covered in ice. It was an ice age and most of England was covered with ice. But a strange thing happened in Shropshire. A lady out walking her dog one day on Saturday the 27th of September 1986. Her name was Eve Roberts, and she was walking her dog near a sand and gravel quarry, which she'd walk her dog every day along the edge of the sand and gravel quarry. And she noticed this one day, that the men who were digging the sand and gravel in the old gravel pit had dug up some strange bones. And she looked at these bones. She was able to be close enough to be able to see these bones, even better than the actual digger driver could, because he was scooping them out with a long dredge and just throwing them on the side. And he, whether he knows him, might have thought it was a tree stump or something. But Ruth was a lot, Eve, was a lot nearer, and she was able to see that they were actually bones. And they were rather large bones. And she couldn't understand why these bones were there. She thought they might have been a horse, a big horse, heavy horse, that had been buried there. Or possibly a circus elephant, because the bones were so big. Anyway, she went home and pondered it, and eventually she decided to get in touch with the authorities. And the authorities came down and had a look at it, and the museum people, and they came to the conclusion that yes, indeed it was elephant-like bones. So they started to examine them, and this scrapbook I've got here, that's a little document they produced, an exhibition all about the woolly mammoth, and that sort of tells you the general story of it. But I was lucky enough, they asked for volunteers. They wanted people to help because it was such a vast area to dig through to try and find the remains of this woolly mammoth or whatever it was that she'd discovered. And so they asked for volunteers to go. And as it happened, I had some spare time from a job I was in. I had a lot of time off. I was self-employed, so I could take a day off any time I liked. So I went on this dig. And I kept a scrapbook, and this is a scrapbook. And I took a lot of photographs while I was there. We didn't have cameras quite the way we did today. We were all film cameras, so we didn't have iPhones and all that to take videos and things. I wish I had, otherwise I'd have taken some videos of it. But I took a whole book full of photographs, and I might just show you one or two here. And it was a big story in the newspapers. All the newspapers, these are all newspaper stories about the digging up of this, what turned out to be a woolly mammoth. And this scrapbook, just to show you one, just to prove it was me, not that you'll recognise me, but if you look on this one, these lights, terrible, never get the light in the right place. But if you look at this one here, there's a chap in a yellow high-vis jacket, that one just there, and that's actually me, digging in the mud, searching for bones. And that's one bone I actually found and handed it in to the archaeologists to piece together. Now, the story of this mammoth was quite interesting, because as time went on, you must understand, these bones weren't fossilized. They weren't turned to stone. They were still bone. And so a lot of the bones, as you can see, one there is lying in the office of the building. These were still very much bone, and they they'd been preserved in the mud of what turned out to be a large kettle hole. Now, kettle holes were left over after the Ice Age. They had large, big ice blocks settled on the earth, weighing thousands of tons, I should imagine, of ice. And these pushed into the ground. And as the ice melted, it formed what they call a kettle hole, which is a large depression in the ground which filled with water. And then gradually this water would fill up and vegetation would grow in it. And they seem to think that this kettle hole was frequented by these mammoths as they were on their migration. There's some more pictures of dredging and machinery working. And what they did, they brought all the soil out onto the field and scattered it about so that we could sort through the mud and see if we could find any remains of this mammoth. And almost 3/4 of this mammoth was found. Now, the story went in the newspapers because not only did they find an adult mammoth, but they found some youngsters. And I think they found 3 what they call baby mammoths. And they seem to think that these mammoths had somehow got into this kettle hole looking for vegetation to eat and had got mired in the mud and therefore trapped. And unfortunately would just sink into the mud and would be trapped there and they'd die of starvation. Now, they think this because they never found any of the heads of the mammoth. The top of the head was missing. And they seem to think that that was perhaps scavenged by, I don't know, other animals that were about, birds or something. And they never found any tusks, or it was mainly the body bones, the ribs, the hip bones, and the large leg bones. And what they did, they managed to piece this creature as best they could back together. They brought in a few pieces like a tusk, and I've got a picture here. I don't know how well it'll show up, but they actually reassembled this mammoth by using the bits they'd found, plus some bits they brought in to make it look like the tusks, and they were able to reconstruct pretty much this whole mammoth. Now, in amongst the bones as well as the mammoths, there was other creatures. There was deer, because they found antlers and bones of deer, which had also got mired. So there was quite a lot of sort of animals about at that time. Now, this place is just outside Shrewsbury, an area called Condover, and it's a big sand and gravel quarry there, where they found this woolly mammoth. And for quite a long time, it was quite a story. Now, if you ever come to Shropshire and you're interested, I mean, this is another construction. I took a photograph of the construction as they laid it out on the ground of the bones they found of the woolly mammoth. And there's some of the hip bones. Again, I don't know how well these photographs, they're old photographs, so they don't show up terribly well. But you can still go and visit if you like. The exhibition is still going. On the way to a place called Ludlow in Shropshire, there's a place called Craven Arms. Now, they've got a sort of a visitor centre, a field studies type centre, and they have got, eventually, after they'd been away and studied these bones for some time in Birmingham University, I believe, they brought them back, and they've got an exhibition there, which is still running now, in the Shropshire Hills Discovery Centre. And you can go and you can see the story of Eve Roberts and her finding the bones. And there's a reconstruction and a woolly mammoth, I believe, there. I haven't been for a while, so I don't quite know what it is, but they've certainly got lots of bits. Now, it was interesting to me at the time, because at that time I really wasn't into rocks and minerals. I'd got a shop and a craft centre and one thing and another, so I wasn't really interested. But after going on that dig, I got a real interest back again in fossils and minerals and what have you. Now, I told you that they didn't find any tusks of those particular mammoths, but if I come over here, I've actually got a piece of woolly mammoth tusk. Now, it's not in a very good condition. It's a bit split and battered about, but it's got the curve on it that you see on mammoths. It's definitely not an elephant, and I've got it mounted on this strange metal bit, but that really was to display it. It was so it would stand up when I used to take it around showing people, and that's why it's got these strange metal going through it. That's got nothing to do with the actual bones, but it's still, again, very much bone or ivory, and that's woolly mammoth tusk, which I managed to buy, and it's one of my favourite bits. Now, one of the things they did find was the teeth. Now, the woolly mammoth's teeth, as you can imagine, it's an elephant. They're pretty big. And I found lots of bits of teeth. In fact, I found one of the teeth of a baby mammoth in that excavation. And because some of the bones were so small, I was wearing that high-vis yellow jacket, as you saw in that picture I showed you. And because there were so many small bits, I would just stick them in my pocket. And when I got back to where the archaeologists were, I just emptied my pockets out, and all the bits of bones I'd found and whatever I found, I'd just tip onto the table and they'd sort them out. Because strictly speaking, you weren't allowed to take any parts of the bones away. I think Eve was about the only one who was allowed to keep a bone herself from the dig, but everyone else had to hand the bones in if you found any. Now, as it happened, when I got home that one of the nights, I was cleaning out my jacket, and I looked in the one of the pocket, and in the corner there was a tiny little bit of mammoth tooth, and I've actually got it here, and I keep it in this little tin because I didn't do anything to it. When they got those most of the bones out of the gravel pit, because they were still bone, when they dried out they were going to crack and fall apart, which always happens when you've got wet deposits and they dry out. They nearly always crack as the material shrinks back. It cracks and breaks apart. Now, in this little tin, believe it or not, I've got a little tiny, oh dear, I don't want it to drop out. I want to tip it over so you can see it. But I've got a tiny little fragment that was stuck in my pocket of a bit of woolly mammoth teeth of the Shropshire woolly mammoth. Now, inside there as well, I don't know whether you can see it very good on camera, but there's like a blue mineral. Now, I can't for the life of me remember what it is, but especially on the teeth, when these animals were rotted away, there's a piece there which is part of the skin. There's almost certainly the jawbone skin of the woolly mammoth, and a piece of it there which is peeled off as it dried. So that's part of the skin and the bone and the mineral that coats old bones when you find them in the ground. And I can't remember what the name of the mineral is. I'll look it up and maybe mention it again on another video. So I've actually got one of the few people that have actually got a tiny little fragment, not really recognizable or worth anything. It's not valuable from a geological, I mean, they got lots of bones and loads of bits and pieces which they were able to study. So they weren't short on bones. So me keeping that little bit really didn't matter. And I don't feel guilty about it. I think I spent about a month there digging all day long and finding nothing. So really, to have a little bit, I didn't think that was too bad. But to give you some idea of how big the teeth of mammoths are, I've got a woolly mammoth tooth here. Now this is a huge woolly mammoth tooth. Now you'll say to me, how do I know it's a woolly mammoth? This one pretty much is turned to stone. It wasn't part of the Shropshire mammoth. In fact, it was found in a quarry some distance away. And I actually bought it off a gentleman who brought it in. He didn't actually tell me where it came from, which is a pity. I'd have liked to have known where it came from. He just told me that it was a woolly mammoth and it was found sort of locally somewhere. Now, you say, well, how do I know it's a woolly mammoth? Well, if you look at the biting surface there, if you look at the shape of the plates that make up this composition of this tooth, they more or less go straight across. Now, that's characteristic of a woolly mammoth tooth, whereas if you had an elephant's tooth, they had like a small depression in the middle where one section butted into the next section and made like a little pointy joint. So they can tell that this is actually a woolly mammoth teeth. And this is the root of it down here, where it'd be in the mouth. And each one of these teeth, they reckon a woolly mammoth would have 3 teeth in its lifetime. And they wore down like a production line. They grew up out of the mouth. And this would be the biting surface. This flat area on the top was the biting surface. And this would grow out of the gum and gradually wear down. And they'd have 3 of those in their lifetime. And then, of course, after that, their teeth would fall out. They wouldn't be able to chew. And they'd be getting pretty old you know, at 90 years old. That's pretty old for an elephant. They probably got killed by other things before they got to that age. Now, another bone I've got here is part of a leg bone. Now this again is woolly mammoth, they believe, because of the size of it, and it's a huge bone, sort of a leg bone or part of a bone. I don't quite know what part, the top end, the bottom end, I'm not sure, but they say that this is woolly mammoth as well. Now, I'll show you this one, because I mentioned to you that they found baby mammoths in this pit over at Condover. Now, I was lucky enough to be able to buy a piece of woolly mammoth, and this is actually the lower jaw of a baby mammoth. You see, he's got a pointy bit here, and that would be the chin, under the chin of the woolly mammoth. So this is how it would be on his face, if I can just show you. And this would go up, and the teeth would start in here, and it's got holes for the blood vessels. So this is the pointy mouth section of the lower jaw of a woolly mammoth. But as you can see, it's still bone. It's not really turned to stone. It's still very hard. It's getting there, but it's very hard. Now, one of the things they found about this Shropshire mammoth was when they did carbon dating on the bones, they were able to discover that these bones weren't as old as what they thought they were. In fact, I think they were something like between 750 and 10,000 years old. I mean, so that meant that woolly mammoths were actually in England, wandering around, scavenging and eating vegetation and dying, sort of a lot earlier or a lot later than what they actually thought. So the present thinking was completely thrown up in the air, and they realised that woolly mammoths were still alive and well just after the last ice age, when the ice was receding away from England. The woolly mammoths were following up the vegetation in the ice sheets. Now you might say, well, England, you've got the English Channel. How on earth did woolly mammoths and other animals cross over that large area of water? I mean, the actual area now, I think, is about 22 miles across the channel. Quite a deep area of water, and certainly no animal could swim that far, certainly not an elephant anyway, to cross over. But back in the day, back in 10,000 years ago, England was a lot different place, and there was what they called a land bridge going across from the continent of Europe across to England. There was actually, the water level was much lower, and it's all caused by these tectonic plates, whereas these plates moved around, as I was saying, and somehow the earth was tilted over and the ground was tilted up somehow, with the ice pushing down, and it meant that the actual, what they call the North Sea now and the English Channel, was actually dry land. I mean, it might have had some very big rivers and crossing places, but the animals were able to migrate across the English Channel on dry land and move up into England as the ice age sort of faded away and vegetation was growing, and they were following the ice. Now, there's an area off the coast down in on the coast of the English Channel, at a place near what they call Lowestoft, and just out there there's an area of sea which they call the Brown Bank, and it's a big fishing area. Now this Brown Bank is quite high, and it's not too far under the water, and the fishermen dredge this area for scallops or whatever the fish they dig up, and along with the fish what they dig up, they find bones of animals that have washed down somehow into the North Sea, presumably during this transition before the North Sea actually flooded completely and caused the sea. And when they dredge there, they find more bones. Now I've got here some bones. This is a vertebrae. It just says it comes from the North Sea, but it's a vertebrae, and you can recognize that as a large chunk, and it's still sort of semi-fossilized, semi-bone, but it still very much looks like a bone. It's not rock, and it's not bone. It's sort of halfway between the two. Now these things, they dredge up from what they call the Brown Bank off Lowestoft, and I've got quite a few here. One of the bones they get quite a lot of is knuckle bones like this, which is the heel bones or the leg bones. And as you can see, they've been in the sea. They're covered in sea creatures. These are like toe bones. And I've got quite a lot of these. And small bones. Now again, these are slightly more fossilized. They're a bit more solid. They're starting to turn to stone. But these are dredged up by the fishermen. And there's that one there, which is a bit like what they found in the gravel pit over at Condover. This is actually a jawbone of the lower jawbone of a deer. You can see that that's again part of the deer. It's had two on one on either side, and the teeth were in there. The teeth have gone, unfortunately, but that it's sort of halfway again between bone and fossilized. Now I brought another bone in just because I happened to see it and it was interesting. But this is a much older bone. It's a vertebrae, but this one has totally turned to stone. This is very hard, rock-like. You can't really call that a bone anymore. And this is a vertebrae, presumably of some kind of dinosaur. Now, I don't know what kind of dinosaur, but it's, I mean, some people may say that it's a large sea creature, like a shark or something. But sharks don't have this kind of bones in them, I don't think. So I'm not sure what vertebrae this is exactly. But you can see a dent in the middle there where the spinal column went through, the nervous system, and there'd be pieces on here that were the ribs of whatever this creature was. And that's its backbone. Very similar to that big lump I just showed you there. And but that one is more or less turned to stone now. So it's almost completely stone. So I hope you've enjoyed this little video. And it's all about my little friend here, the woolly mammoth. And I found a great joy in going and helping dig up the bones and telling you the story of how I managed to help dig up the Shropshire mammoths. And I've got lots of bits and pieces of woolly mammoths, as you saw, the jawbone and the tusk. And I've got other pieces in the shed. But that gives you the story of it. So I hope you enjoyed that little bit of information. I love my scrapbook, and they sent me letters thanking me for helping. These letters in the front here, asking me to visit the exhibition and various things about it, and all about the exhibition and how it was. And I treasure that. It's a memory back in '86. I can look through that and see how I used to be when I was a younger man and able to dig out bits and pieces. And they found an awful lot of information from looking at those bones of the woolly mammoth that were dug up at Condover all those years ago. Anyway, that's enough for me today, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Anyway, here's Grandad saying bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.